hard-working Aussie now embroiled in a life-and-death fight to save his home and his livelihood.
Climate change, because he thinks that the way to reduce emissions is to raise the price of everything.
The farm has been included in the federal government's plans to meet Kyoto targets.
This is a point that's nearly always forgotten in all the commentaries about climate change, that global warming isn't killing anyone and it isn't going to kill anyone.
Ignoring a man on a hunger strike is politically very dangerous for Rudd, especially when, at the same time, he is seen writing kids' books, commentating the cricket.
Prime Minister, I know you've got a busy schedule. You've been all over the place. Pleasure to have you in here again, and thank you for making the time.
More than 100 new taxes are now being developed under the umbrella of curbing greenhouse gases.
We can sit there and then we can just move the cameras to see what it is.
Don't usually make the environment a political battleground. So why are you doing it?
Because it is a vote changer, and I think that I can put together a more attractive environmental package than Mr. Rudd.
Why are you so convinced that the environment is going to be a vote changer at the next election?
Well, a lot of traditional Labor voters are very unhappy about Mr. Rudd's great big tax masquerading as an environment policy, and I think a lot of middle-of-the-road people and Green voters will be attracted to the sorts of initiatives that I'm flagging this evening. I think in particular people want to see real action sorting out the problems of water in the Murray-Darling Basin, and I think people want to see real action by the application of a green army to the sort of land management.
Green preferences at the next election?
Well, essentially it is, Heather, because
it's as shameless as that.
Labor hasn't delivered. Labor hasn't delivered. I mean, I challenge the Green movement to nominate anything that the Rudd government has done to seriously benefit the environment, other than perhaps ratifying the Kyoto Protocol, and it was actually the Howard government that ensured that we met our Kyoto targets. It wasn't due to Kevin Rudd that we've met them.
But to the farmer first. Peter, good morning.
Good morning.
You're up the pole, are you, with a mobile phone?
I just want to give you a comment.
Yeah.
You must remember, 2 years ago, after Michael Duffy gave you a story, you spoke about my problem and said my story was the worst story, worse than Joe.
Really? Well, I didn't follow it through, and I'm ashamed of that.
No, you don't have to be. My word, I've heard so many wonderful things. You interviewed Turnbull the other day. You interviewed the man from London about the errors on global warming. It was so penetrating. I must congratulate you.
Thank you so much. Well, that's no consolation.
Every home and business in the United States will be federally regulated and controlled. Mandatory home inspections will be carried out by federal inspectors, and it's all at the expense of the homeowner.
In New York, they're called the Environmental Police.
On this day, a surprise visit to a market in Brooklyn's Chinatown.
And every day you're not in compliance, you face huge fines.
Go to page 235. The Secretary may set and collect reasonable inspection fees to cover the cost of inspections required. So number one, they can come in, the federal government can come in and inspect your house and send you the bill. And if they find that you're out of compliance with this new federal code, the Secretary shall assess a civil penalty for violations of this section. And then further, going to page 236, each day of unlawful occupancy shall be considered a separate violation. We're setting up a global warming Gestapo that can literally come in, and now this new term, unlawful occupancy. So now living in your home is considered unlawful under this bill. This is ludicrous.
Worst of all, carbon czars in more than 35 federal agencies are given unlimited dictatorial power to tax all forms of carbon and carbon emissions. The Commissar Green Police openly brag that they will have the power to selectively enforce the new edicts on a case-by-case basis.
It's funny because when I tell people what I do for a living, the first response usually is, "You're with the environmental police?" There is no environment in New York City.
With this new power, the Green Mafia can take over the entire economy through selective enforcement.
We know, Madam Speaker, that this national energy tax will cost the American people $2 trillion. We know that. We know this will result in a loss of 2.5 million jobs every year for the American people. We know that. We know this will result in a reduced standard of living for Americans. We know that. What is the point and what's the benefit?
Peter Spencer is a hot political potato. And the reason being is that both sides of politics have played a role in this legislation which has effectively locked farmers out of their land without compensation.
As a part of Australia's commitment to protect native vegetation and to reduce carbon emissions under the Kyoto Protocol, Peter and thousands of farmers like him across the country have been subjected to a government-imposed ban on land clearing. The saved trees are natural carbon sinks worth an estimated $10.8 billion to the government in reduced carbon emissions, should Kevin Rudd's emissions trading scheme go ahead. But here's the rub. The farmers, who can no longer develop this land, have received no compensation.
They're welcome to take my land, but the Constitution says they have to pay.
Not only for him, for us as well. He's fighting for all Australian farmers.
Peter's hunger strike has galvanised the farming community. On Monday, hundreds of supporters gathered at Parliament House and at Peter's property in the Southern Highlands to force the government to meet Peter's demands that farmers be justly compensated for what they describe as the insidious, deceitful theft of their land.
Why should they take without paying?
Like bloody hell. It's not just farmers, it's people that own things. Property rights, freehold. That's what it means.
The only response from the Prime Minister's office is he has said the government does not take any notice of people taking passive protests, as in hunger strikes, or threatening the government. They say we make laws and rules and policy in the national interest, and Peter Spencer needs to come down off there, get medical attention, and go to the courts to get remedy.
I have heard that the government's line is that they are not going to be held to ransom by one man's blackmail project, even though they would be sympathetic to your personal situation, that they can't make policy on the basis of one man's stand.
Yes.
What's your response to that?
Mr. Rudd, how dare you tell me that you'll just carry on breaching the Constitution when I followed every path known? I wrote to you 2 years ago and said, don't throw that excuse up to me 2 years' time. I knew he would try and pass the buck.
The buck will stop with me.
How dare you work outside the Constitution? Wake up to yourself. It's just not on. I'm not here trying to threaten you. I'm trying to get this country back on track.
It has to be understood. Peter Spencer is not an anti-green, he's not anti-environment. He's simply asking for a fair go.
Peter King is Peter Spencer's barrister. Before any hunger strike, the two Peters spent years of fighting for compensation in the courts, to no avail.
Under our Constitution, the notion that we have, which is fundamental to our democracy, is that nobody loses his or her or its land unless it's been paid for.
Australia is facing penalties in excess of $100 billion to the UNFCCC.
The UNFCCC is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Now, if Kevin Rudd were to allow Peter and other farmers to recommence land clearing now, they would likely not meet their carbon reduction target.